Welcome back to Church History. This is our final week on online lecturing. We are still going one more week next Monday on ground at the harbor, and that lecture will be uploaded as well. But in any event, we have a lot of stuff to still address, so I want to go through a quick timeline here. You have 590 AD. Talked about some of this stuff last week, just a quick recap. You have Gregory the Great, Gregory the Great, Pope, to about 604. 596, we have Augustine of Canterbury. He evangelizes among the Anglo-Saxons in England. And then in 597, you have Ethelbert of Kent, who becomes a Christian. Ethelbert of Kent, that's in 597. He becomes a believer, follower of Christ. 622, you have Muhammad's advent of Islam, the birth of Islam. 623, I should say 3 years before or after, roughly 626 is safer. The Slavs and the Avars besiege, that's A-V-A-Rs, they besiege Constantinople, and of course they're repulsed by Heraclius, and then approximately 635, you have the first Christian missionaries to reach China. 638, Jerusalem falls to the Muslims, along with Palestine and Syria. And then in 642, Alexandria falls, School of Alexandria is toast and leveled to the ground. 651, Persia falls. And then Carthage falls in 698. Then in 681, you have the Third Council of Constantinople, and you can look that up under Populi. You have all the councils, various creeds, before this time and after. 711, Muslims invade Spain, and like I said last time, they haven't stopped since. They still blow up trains in Spain. 717 to about 718, you have Leo III, who stops Muslims in the east at Constantinople. And then Boniface comes on the scene in 718, goes as a missionary to the Saxons of Germany. Not the Anglo-Saxons of England, but to Germany, Boniface. 726, you have iconoclasm. The icon controversy begins again, Eastern Church. And then in 730, Leo calls for the destruction of icons. Charles Martel stops the Muslims in the west at Tours, the Battle of Tours, 732. And then you have the papacy, or the papal states, established in 754. And then Second Council of Nicaea settles the icon controversy in 787, takes us up to the year 800, where you have Charlemagne being the Holy Emperor. A brief overview of this age. The great movements of peoples continue from this moment on. You have the Slavs, you have the Magyars, M-A-G-Y-A-R-S, you have the Lombards, you have the Vikings. Excuse my accent, I'm from Sweden, so some of these words I might say I'm a little sort of in the left field, but Vikings, Saxons, you have the Mongols, and of course the Muslims. Political developments, you have the East and the West. Their communication is hindered due to Slavic migrations, yet cities are declining, trade and travel is restricted, and then of course large farming estates have their issues as well, and you have the isolation of kingdoms. New challenges to the church at this time. You have ignorance, half-converted people. You have an emphasis on land like old pagan religions. You have, of course, missions, East and the West divisions. High points at this point would be Catholic power. Development in early church history, during difficult times, strong leadership was needed to face persecution and heresy. Some leaders then naturally became more important than others. What about the importance of Rome? Well, you have Peter and Paul. You have, of course, the Book of Romans, a large, wealthy church. It's the capital of the empire. Some are saying it was the center of sound teaching. And then you have the destruction of other main church centers. Claims for authority for pope or papacy. You have Matthew 16, verses 8 through 19. Keys of the kingdom. What does that mean? Keys of the kingdom. You know, you go to the Vatican, you see the keys on top of a lot of these churches, including the Vatican Museum, throughout Rome. John 21, 15 through 19, you have the special commission to feed the sheep. Is that a case for the papacy? Well, other considerations you have in Matthew 16, again, verses 13 through 19, where we use the word Peter, Petros, which means stone, versus Petra, meaning rock. So the other disciples, it seems to me, certainly didn't see this setting Peter apart as the foundation of the church. If you look at Matthew 18:1, Matthew 16, verses 21 through 23, Luke 22, 31 through 34, you have the rebuke and the prediction of failure. If you compare Matthew 16, verse 19, and John 20, 19 through 23, the commission there is for all the apostles. Now, number 3, if you compare Matthew 16, verse 19, and John 20, 19 through 23, again, we already said that the commission is for all the apostles. Number 4, 1 Peter 2, verses 6 through 8, Peter said that Jesus himself was the foundation. Very interesting there. Also in the book of Acts, chapter 4, verses 10 and 11, Peter said it there as well. 1 Corinthians 3:11, Paul said the foundation is Jesus himself. In Ephesians 5:23, Paul again, Christ is the head of the church, not Peter. So that you have the Protestant response there to the papacy. This is largely what most Protestants would argue to this day. Galatians 2:11, Paul obviously did not see Peter as pope, and we remember Peter was rebuked, of course, at Joppa, just next to Tel Aviv, the shore in Israel, the Mediterranean. So he was rebuked, called a hypocrite, etc., etc. Now, of course, Catholic answer would be, look, he's not perfect, and he has learned. He denied the Lord 3 times, yes, and so do we at times. So, therefore, he is not perfect, but he learned and is now stronger, and so forth. Now, takes us to Gregory the Great, 546-04. Just going to go through this quickly. The son of an old and prosperous Roman family, he was a trained attorney, and actually became the prefect of Rome. After his father died, he endowed 7 monasteries and became a monk himself. So he was a serious player, Gregory the Great. He served the church as a representative of the Pope to the Eastern Emperor, and then as the abbot of St. Andrew's before being elected Pope, even though he did not want to leave the monastery. He was fine there. I don't know if I want to become Pope, etc. Nonetheless, what about missions at this point? He had a heart for missions like no one else. Sent missionaries to England and to the Germanic tribes. His theology, he had a great influence on Catholic theology. Some good things here. A commentary on Job, 35 books long, I believe. Some of the not so good things. He established the doctrine of purgatory, encouraged the veneration of saints, relics, and icons. Now, of course, that's where you have the Protestants and the Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox Church, or just Orthodoxy in general, in strong disagreement, whereas the veneration of saints is pretty much accepted by all, except for Protestant circles. He began to see the Mass, M-A-S-S, the Mass, as a sacrifice. He also worked to fight corruption in the church, and although he was responsible for making the office of Pope more important than it had ever been before, due to what we just said, he was still a modest man. He refused to be called Pope and saw himself simply as, quote-unquote, the servant of the servants of God, unquote. What about development of power of Pope under Gregory? In wealth, you have the papal lands. Sicily, Gaul, and North Africa, they came with slaves to work them. They paid no taxes on these. Soon the church had far more money than anybody else. So now you have the wealth of Rome. In government, with wealth came power. Of course, one, because of isolation from from the emperor in the east. Power grew greater and greater in the west. The Pope took care of the poor, feeding Rome, negotiating with barbarians and kings, paying ransom and tribute. In the church itself, you have the battles with Stephen the Faster. Look that up in your book, Stephen the Faster. What about Western missions? Ireland, England, and we're going to talk about the clash of Celtic and Roman missionaries. In Ireland, you have the Celtic Christians, more so emotional, evangelical, democratic. Then you have Columba in Scotland. You have Columbanus in Switzerland, or he went to Switzerland. And Aidan, A-I-D-A-N, Aidan, who went to England. Now in England, you have Roman and Latin Christians, and more disciplined, a bit more secular and scholastic. Gregory, you have the Angles, Augustine of Canterbury, again sent there in 596. And of course, King Ethelbert and his Christian wife Bertha, B-E-R-T-H-A. Then you have the clash of Celtic and Roman missionaries. The authority of Rome, you have the tonsure haircut, you have the date of Easter, you have the celibacy of the priesthood, and the decision of King Oswy, O-S-W-Y, the Latin Church wins out. What's going on in Germany right around now? 680 to 754, you have Winfrid, again Boniface, born in England. At the age of 40, he heard Wellibrod's work among the Saxons, and also the Frisian King Radbod, working to destroy much of Willebrord's efforts. Willebrod is W-I-L-L-I-B-R-O-R-D, Willebrod. He then went as a missionary, but had little success. He then went to gain more support, see what we can do. Now you have the Oak of Donar, D-O-N-A-R, in Geismar, G-E-I-S-M-A-R. So the Oak of Donar in Geismar established a monastery and church center in Fulda, F-U-L-D-A, in Fulda. Boniface had many battles with the Frankish church leaders, nothing new. He went back after many years to work, and in time he was martyred in June of 754. You also have women as missionaries. Boniface was the first to use them in an organized way. Summary, the rise of Islam, again, 570 to 632, that's Muhammad's lifespan. Born in Mecca, he was influenced by both Christianity and Judaism. At this time, Arabia was filled with idolatry and polytheism. At the age of 40, the angel Gabriel supposedly appeared to him and called him to be a prophet of Allah. He became strongly monotheistic. The Quran is, of course, the holy book of the Muslims. You have the Hijra, H-I-J-R-A, 622. In Mecca, Muhammad's ideas were not all, they weren't well received in Mecca. So he fled to Medina with a few followers. While there, he gathered great report in Medina. Got quite a bit of followers there, but yet the Christians and the Jews rejected his ideas. So he turned from Jerusalem to Mecca as the center of worship. Can't be the Jews and the Christians. In Mecca, 630. So you have Hijra, 622, Mecca, 630. Muhammad returned with an army of his followers and conquered Mecca. He then did away with all the idols around the Kaaba. Muhammad then died in 632. Soon after, armies of the faithful, the Muslims, radicals for sure, began to take the message of Islam throughout the Arabian Peninsula and beyond. Islamic expansion from 632 to 732. In the first 100 years following Muhammad's death, Muslim armies swept 3,300 kilometers across North Africa, reaching into Spain. Damascus fell in 635, Antioch in 636, Jerusalem fell in 638, Caesarea in 640, and Alexandria in 642, Persia in 651, and Carthage in 698. In 711, they invaded Spain. Finally, they were stopped in France by Charles Martel, and God bless him, in 732, and at Constantinople by Leo III in 717 to 18. All right, the Muslims were aided in their advance by divisions among Christians, such as the Syrians, Armenians, Ethiopians, even welcomed Muslims, and their control as a way to break with the emperor in Constantinople. So you have a political motivation there for them to team up with these guys. The effects of the rise of Islam, well, by the 900s, the Islamic Empire was the most prosperous in the world. For Christians, many of them saw Muhammad and his movement as the beast in Revelation, and some even think that today. Sort of a little bit in the left field, or quite a bit, I should say. Christians and Jews had a choice of either paying taxes or converted, just like what ISIS do. Well, ISIS would first say, pay taxes or convert, and then they change their mind, just start beheading people. But the pagans had to convert or pay higher taxes, and if they didn't, ultimately they would be killed. Many restrictions were placed on Christians. Colored patch on clothes, sort of like the Star David that the Jews had to wear in Nazi Germany. Same thing for Christians. Colored patch on their clothes. Intermarriage was outlawed. No new churches could be built. No church bells could be rung. And of course, you couldn't evangelize. All right, what about the law of apostasy? Anyone who leaves the Islamic faith must be killed. For the church, this led to a serious weakening of the Eastern Church. Of course it would. Loss of territory among Israel, of course, Jerusalem, Alexandria, Antioch, and Carthage. Constantinople is threatened at this point. Missions are restricted. And you have, of course, iconoclasm itself going on. What about icons and iconoclasm? Iconoclasm happened only in the Eastern Church and was influenced in part by Muslim charges of Christians being idolaters. Icon is, of course, image in Greek, and clast is to break. So iconoclasm, breaking of religious images. So the Muslims had a little bit to say about that whole time in church history. Ancient Rome, the icon of the emperor, was revered as if the emperor himself was present. Icons of the emperors were everywhere in public buildings and places. Emperors, even Constantine, would erect huge images of themselves at Constantinople. And that is idolatry, I think, at least this point in my journey. Finally, Justinian erected a huge image of Christ on the cross over the great main gate of the city instead of one of himself. So, good for Justinian. In the church, saints and Mary kept taking on more and more importance in the life of the believer, just in all church life. The saints and Mary, big play here. And we see that, of course, even today. Icons were soon credited with miracle-working powers, and people eventually could not distinguish between the thing itself and what it represented. And many call that they fell into idolatry, of course. Icons were also big moneymakers for some monasteries, Leo III, the iconoclast, what did he do? Emperor of the Eastern Empire and a great leader responsible for the defeat of the Muslims at Constantinople. The gate of Constantinople in 726, 730, iconoclasm as a policy. Leo called for the removal and destruction of all icons in public places and churches. Remove them all. Destroy them all. Those supporting icons, mostly monks and uneducated and simple people, but also many women, were of course persecuted. Leo's son, Constantine V, had icon supporters excommunicated and sent into exile. He also tried to destroy the reputation of the monks. 50,000 of these were exiled from Constantinople. He also destroyed relics and discouraged prayers to the saints. What about the attitude of the Pope at this point? Well, he condemned iconoclasm and tried to exert authority over the Eastern Empire. This is where John of Damascus comes on the scene in 730 to 60. He felt it was wrong to worship icons, but that icons could instruct and help the believer in the worship of the true Christ. The Second Council of Nicaea in 787, you have the restoration of the use of images. This was the last council where the Eastern and the Western churches would agree. The council also passed laws requiring the presence of relics before any new churches could be built. Emperor Theophilus is now here, 829 to 942, declared a death penalty or exile for icon worshippers again. So in 843, Theodora, who is Theophilus' widow, called another council that condemned all the iconoclasts. And of course, the Feast of Orthodoxy celebrates the end of iconoclasm, destruction of religious items and relics, the first Sunday in Lent. All right, differences in attitudes towards icons between East and West. Well, the Eastern Church, you could, no rounded images, only paintings and like a flat sculpture, like we mentioned in previous classes. And the Western Church kept fully rounded images. Okay, we'll pick it up again in the next session. You're going to have a couple of short lectures coming like this. I hopefully have time to watch them. All right, Lord bless.